Hey Theos Bible Kids, thanks for joining us for another week. Make sure that you like and subscribe for more fun videos. And if you want a free study guide to go along with this, it's in the link in the description below. So this week we're talking about Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, or Babel, however you want to say it. Well, have you ever asked your question or this question to your mom or to yourself? Hey, where do all the languages in the world come from? And how did all these different people get different looks and different languages and different cultures and ethnicities? Were they all a result of Noah? How did this happen? In this story, we're going to discover the answer to that very question. You see, God's command to Noah and his family in Genesis chapter 9 was to multiply and to fill the earth and scatter all around it. But they didn't do that. Instead, in these stories, we see them settling in an area called Shinar, and that was later known as Babylon. Genesis 11 says now the whole world had one language and one common speech. Could you imagine traveling to any country on the earth and they would speak the same language? How cool would that be? And as people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." So they used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. And then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." So notice in this whole paragraph, there's some key statements which reveals the true desire that the people had to build the Tower of Babel. Firstly, they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." You know, a city contains people, doesn't it? It doesn't scatter people. It's meant for protection or security. So this would speak to man's love and desire and need for security. Security from danger, security from pestilence, security from a possible flood again. So they built a city for themselves, and they didn't take the risk of going out into the unknown and filling the earth as God had commanded them to do. Second, they said, let's build a tower that reaches to the heavens. And basically, they wanted to reach God. The tower would be made of the same waterproof materials that Noah even used for the construction of the ark. How interesting is that? Now, their intention was that it would become indestructible even for God. So in case God wanted to flood the earth again, which we remember, the rainbow was a sign of God's promise that he would never flood the earth again. But these people didn't take God at his word. They instead trusted their own devices. Number 3, they said, so that we may make a name for ourselves. You know, they wanted to glorify themselves and not God. They wanted to make a name and become wonderful in their own eyes instead of worshiping the one who is wonderful. You see, God's will for all mankind is not that we find joy in being praised, but that we find joy in praising him. And that's a quote by a pastor named John Piper. Number 4, again, their other intent was direct rebellion to God's words to them. They said, otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. And of course, they didn't want to be scattered. They wanted strength in numbers. The whole account of what happened at Babel with its anti-God plans, it was organized rebellion against God. Plain and simple. It was a direct distrust of God's promise. And it shows that man really hasn't gotten any better than the flood. Because remember, God flooded the earth just prior to this because of man's wickedness. And so we have sin in our members from birth all the way until death. And we need the power of Jesus Christ to break that curse. God is going to begin to make man better, and he will start as he always starts, with a man who will do his will. And even if he doesn't do his will perfectly, enter Abram. We're going to talk about Abraham, but did you know that Abraham wasn't always Abraham? First, he started out as just Abram. It was a shorter name, but that was the name that he was given at birth. And his name was changed by God when he made a covenant with him. And Abram is a very popular guy in the Bible. He's mentioned, in fact, 312 times. he's in 272 verses in the Bible. And he's arguably the most famous man in the Old Testament. And he's certainly one of the most influential characters in all of history. You see, the book of Genesis covers more than 2,000 years and more than 20 generations. And yet it spends almost a third of its text on the life of this one guy, Abram. Men and women in the Bible are always famous for different things. You know, Moses was the Egypt and the Exodus, and of course David was the king and the man after God's heart. We think of different characters through the Bible, Daniel in the lion's den, and David and Goliath. How could I forget that? But Abraham is known for something, and perhaps you're not very familiar for what he's really known for. Abram is known for his great faith, and he's also known for being a friend of God. Abraham was raised in a family that didn't worship God. He was from idol-worshiping family. They worshipped idols. In fact, his father, many historians believe, had an idol shop. And Abram grew up working and making idols along with his dad. And he didn't know the true God until he met this true God through a divine encounter and a divine call on his life. Abram married a woman named Sarai. And she, of course, also was unfamiliar with the God of the universe. And her name actually means contentious, which means kind of troublemaker. She was also barren and unable to have children. Abram's name actually means father. How interesting is that? The man whose name means father is married to a woman who can't bear children. And it would have been strange culturally for the two of them to be together. However, this whole bizarre scenario in their union and the meaning of his name and her barrenness would prove to be such an important part of God's plan for their lives and his redemptive work on him. Abraham was called by God very specifically, and you'll see that as you read chapter 12. It says specifically, the Lord had said to Abram at this point, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. Isn't that weird? God didn't give him a specific place yet. He just said, to the land that I will show you. How vague is that? I don't know about you, but if I said, hey, stand up right now, just stand up. And I'm not going to give you an instruction after that, but just stand up and go. And I don't know where you're going, but I'm not going to tell you yet, but just do it. Wouldn't you be like, why? But for some reason, Abram knew that he wasn't just talking to a normal man. He knew that this was the God of the universe and that he should obey. So he was to leave his home country, the place he'd grown up, and he was to go to a totally unknown place that God would show him eventually and that God would promise to him. Then we see in chapter 12, Abraham went, and as the Lord told him to go, Lot went with him, who was his nephew. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from his home country, Haran. Abram didn't go all the way, though. He only partially obeyed God, and yet he would eventually go all the way to the place that God would call him. Abram certainly became a great giant of faith. But in these early days, we see that he's just starting off in his relationship with God. He didn't start off as a hero of faith. He just set an example to us of a person that was growing in faith and in obedience. Sometimes I know it's hard to obey your mom and dad because you think, why do I have to do that? Why do I have to obey this? Why do I have to listen to you? It doesn't make sense. But as a child, we have to remember that our parents are older than us and they see things from a different perspective. In the same way, even as an adult, I have to remember that God is greater than me and he sees things way more and way better than I see. So my obedience is important because it's always for a reason. Just like your obedience, you're practicing right now. You might not be a great hero of faith as a kid, but you can certainly become one through faith and obedience. And you can practice this every day at home with your family and with your parents. Now, more important than Abram's faith was God's promise. Notice how often that God says I will in the following verses in chapter 12. He says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And on the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God was blessing Abram. Even before anything had transpired, God was blessing him as a way of saying, this is what I want to do. I'm giving you a future. I want to do something special with your life. Galatians chapter 3, verses 8 to 9 says, and the scriptures, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, who were people who were not the Jews, okay? The Gentiles were a people that were not God's covenant people. He preached the gospel to Abram before, saying, in you all the nations shall be blessed. So then those who are of faith are blessed with believing Abram. So what this means for us, for you and I, is that when we believe in Jesus and we put all of our trust in Jesus, we're having the same faith that Abram had in God. When God said, in you all the nations shall be blessed. We too are recipients of that same blessing that God blessed Abram with when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. God was calling Abram and all of his descendants to look beyond themselves to the nations, to all the families of the earth. There you see was the missionary character of the seed of Abraham. They just had to recognize it. God didn't call them to that one city or to that one place because he just wanted them to stay there. No, God was calling him to have generations and generations of people who would come from the seed of Abraham, which means from his children. So Abram's children would be blessed, and then their children would be blessed, and their children's children would be blessed, and their children's children would be blessed, and children, and I could just go on and on and on and on and on. God was calling. This was a huge movement of the blessing of God that you and I, as we put our faith in Jesus, are now a part of that Abrahamic blessing. Download the free study guide in the link in the description below. Like and subscribe this for more awesome Theos Bible Kids videos. See you next time.
Theos Bible